When a young mother like Stacy Peterson just vanishes into thin air, the first questions are always the same. Did she leave on her own? Did she just need to get away? Or was it something much, much darker? In this case, the search for those answers would unravel a story of secrets, lies, and another suspicious death that no one saw coming. It's a story that really challenges that old saying, no body, no crime. Because sometimes a missing person is just the beginning, and the evidence of a crime is hidden in a trail of past behavior and a pattern of control. To get this story, you first need to understand the man at the center of it all, Drew Walter Peterson. His story begins in Bolingbrook, Illinois. He was born there on January 5th, 1954. His parents were Donald and Betty Morphy Peterson. His father was a Marine, so Drew's childhood home, where he was the oldest of three kids, was, by all accounts, incredibly strict. Life was regimented. You followed the rules, you woke up when you were told, you went to bed when you were told. That was just the way it was. Before we get into today's case, drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from? What time is it? And what's the weather like over there? Also, what case should I do next? Let me know down below. I read all of them. And hit that subscribe button. Let's begin. Growing up, he went to Willowbrook High School. He was on the cross-country team and ended up graduating back in 1972. It was in high school that he met his first love, a girl named Carol Brown. They were the classic high school sweethearts. They even went to senior prom together. After graduation, Drew's path gets a little blurry. He joined the Army, but also started college in 1974. It seems like he probably only spent a couple of years in the military before getting an honorable discharge and coming back home. He moved to Falls Church, Virginia, for a bit, where he started training to become a police officer. 1974 was a big year for him. He married Carol, his high school girlfriend, and they went on to have two sons, Paul and Eric. By 1977, Drew's career was taking off. He was an officer with the Bolingbrook Police Force, and just a year later, he was assigned to a regional narcotics squad. He was good at his job, so good that he was named Police Officer of the Year in 1979. Professionally, Drew Peterson was on top of the world, but his personal life, that was a different story. His marriage to Carol, the girl he'd known since high school, it fell apart after just 6 years. The reason, and this is important, was because he was cheating on her. Right there, that's the first sign of a behavior that's going to define this entire story. Just 2 years after that divorce, in 1982, he married again, this time to a woman named Vicki Connolly. They were married for about 10 years and ran a bar together in Romeoville. Now, you might be thinking, what happened to his police career? Well, he got himself demoted. He was even temporarily fired from the narcotics squad because he was caught taking bribes and dealing the same drugs he was supposed to be taking off the streets. It was a huge blow to his ego, and behind closed doors, it made him even more controlling, more violent. Vicki saw that dark side up close. She would later come forward and say that during their marriage, Drew threatened her life, telling her he knew how to make a death look like an accident. And while all this was going on, he was, of course, cheating on her too, with a woman named Kathleen Savio. We'll be talking a lot more about her. When Vicki found out about the affair in February of 1992, that was it for them. They were done. So now Drew is twice divorced, his police career is tarnished, and he turns his full attention to Kathleen. They got married on May 3rd, 1992, just a few months after his divorce from Vicki was finalized. Kathleen, who most people called Kitty, was an accountant. She and Drew had two sons together, Thomas and Christopher, born in 1993 and 94. They lived in a house on Pheasant Chase Drive in Bolingbrook, and their marriage lasted for about 11 years. And then, it ended, because, in what had become his signature move, Drew cheated on her too. Their divorce was made final in October of 2003, but a major piece of it was still up in the air: the money. The financial settlement was still waiting to be finalized. Drew Peterson had a pattern. It was a dark, repeating cycle of control, infidelity, and threats that seemed to follow him through 3 different marriages. And understanding that pattern is the only way to make sense of what happened when his fourth wife, a young woman named Stacy, vanished without a trace. This is a story where the clues to a potential crime weren't just found at a scene, but were scattered across years of past behavior, culminating in one of the most mysterious disappearances in recent memory, and a case that would challenge the old saying, "No body, no crime." The man at the center of this storm, Drew Walter Peterson, a 17-year-old girl named Stacy Ann Cales. He was a man in his late 40s, a police officer, and he was pursuing a teenager. Stacy's life had been marked by tragedy long before she met Drew. Born in 1984, she was one of 6 children who had an incredibly difficult upbringing. One sister died in a house fire before Stacy was born. Another sister died from SIDS right before her eyes. Her parents' marriage was volatile and eventually fell apart. For a time, Stacy and her siblings were neglected. Their mother, Christy, vanished under mysterious circumstances, a disappearance the kids always believed was a murder. Their father struggled with alcoholism and couldn't properly care for them. So when Stacy, now a young woman studying to be a nurse at a local college and working at a hotel, met Drew Peterson, she saw a savior. He was older, yes, but he was a police sergeant. He seemed to offer the stability and security she had never known. Her own father, knowing full well that Drew was nearly 30 years older than his teenage daughter, actually gave her permission to date him. It's a detail that's just awful. You have to wonder if he thought a cop would keep her safe, or if he simply didn't care. Soon, Stacy was pregnant, and at the time, Drew was still technically married to Kathleen. After Stacy's son Anthony was born, and just 1 week after Drew's divorce from Kathleen was officially granted, he and Stacy got married on October 18, 2003. They moved into a house on Pheasant Chase Court, less than a mile from where Kathleen lived with their 2 sons. For a little while, it seemed like Drew had finally gotten everything he wanted, but on March 1, 2004, everything changed again. After not being able to reach Kathleen for a day, Drew asked her neighbor and best friend Mary to check on her. Mary entered the house and found 40-year-old Kathleen lifeless in the bathtub. The scene, she said, would haunt her for the rest of her life. Investigators were called, but bizarrely, they ruled her death an accidental drowning. This was despite the fact that the bathtub was dry, and Kathleen had bruises on her body and a large gash on the back of her head. Less than a month later, Drew sold Kathleen's house. When police questioned him, he had a perfect alibi, provided by his new 17-year-old wife, Stacy. She said he'd been with her and the kids all day. With that, Kathleen Savio was buried, and her death was officially ruled an accident, leaving a cloud of mystery and suspicion over the whole community. So Kathleen's death was officially labeled a strange kind of accident, and for a while, that was the end of it. But 3 years later, something else unexplained happened. And this time, the person at the center of it all was Stacy. By 2007, 23-year-old Stacy was getting close to finishing her nursing degree, and then one day in October, she disappeared. It was her sister, Cassandra, who reported her missing on October 29th. You see, Stacy had plans with Cassandra for October 28th. They were supposed to get together and paint Cassandra's house. Stacy had even been over at Cassandra's house the day before that, on October 27th. She left around 11:30 at night, but not before telling her family that she wanted to divorce Drew. So after she was reported missing, the police got involved and these massive searches for Stacy began. She had kids, she was excited about finally finishing her nursing degree. Her family insisted she would never just up and leave her children and her family like that. Not unless she was scared of something or someone. The whole community came together to look for Stacy. They put up missing person posters everywhere. People went door to door, trying to get any information they could. But Drew, he didn't seem to be on the same page. In fact, his story was that Stacy had called him from the Bolingbrook airport and told him she was leaving him and the kids for another man. And interestingly enough, Stacy's car, a 2000 Pontiac Grand Am, was found abandoned at that exact airport. The only things missing from their house and from the car were her swimsuit, some cash, and Stacy's passport. Drew seemed convinced and told people that Stacy was just out dancing with another man. He also wasn't very cooperative during the investigation or the searches. After getting a search warrant, investigators confiscated Drew's firearms, his computers, and his phones, but they didn't find anything incriminating. And this is when Kathleen's death, from 3 years earlier, came roaring back into the spotlight. A lot of people started thinking, wait a sec. It's pretty weird that one of Drew's wives died under mysterious circumstances, and now his current wife has vanished without a trace. It just wasn't sitting right with people. And Drew wasn't helping his own case. He was doing interviews left and right like he was some kind of movie star, all while maintaining his innocence and seeming to really enjoy the attention. I mean, let's be real, if he truly had nothing to hide, then I guess it's not totally out of character for someone like Drew to enjoy a little bit of local fame. Well, before long, Drew became the prime suspect. Not just in Stacy's disappearance, but in Kathleen's death too. And to back that suspicion up, Kathleen's body was exhumed, and a second autopsy was performed. And this time, Kathleen's injuries didn't line up with an accident at all. They actually did 2 separate autopsies, one by the detectives and another one done privately by the family's own investigative team. And the results, they were crystal clear. Kathleen's cause of death was drowning, yes, but it wasn't an accident. It became obvious that a struggle had happened first and that the whole scene had been staged to look like an accident. The theory was that the bathtub had been filled with water, but it slowly drained out, which is why the tub was empty when her friend Mary found her. But what's infuriating is that the coroner who originally ruled her death an accident, he was buddies with Drew. And he'd apparently convinced the original coroner's jury that Drew wasn't a violent guy and wouldn't hurt anyone. It's believed this coroner deliberately ruled Kathleen's death an accident, allegedly even when he had evidence that pointed to the contrary. It's honestly scary to think about how much influence Drew had, even after he'd been fired from the police force. Soon after, a pastor from Stacy's church came forward with a chilling story. He said that before Stacy went missing, she had confided in him. According to the pastor, Stacy told him that Drew had murdered Kathleen and made it look like an accident, and that she was terrified for her own life. Stacy also told the pastor that the night before Kathleen's body was found, Drew had come home late, dressed in black, carrying a duffel bag. She said he immediately dumped women's clothing from the bag into the washing machine. Then, he turned to Stacy and warned her, telling her exactly what she needed to say to investigators to back up his story. This, of course, just deepened the case against Drew and gave him a clear motive for wanting Stacy gone. Cassandra also came forward, saying that Stacy wasn't happy in her marriage and that she wanted a divorce, but Drew wouldn't give her one. Cassandra also said that Stacy had told her, if anything ever happened to her, it would be Drew's fault. And now, she was gone. Then another person came forward with some chilling information. It was Drew's own stepbrother, Thomas Morphy, and he was actually in the hospital at the time because he had tried to take his own life. The reason why? Because he was convinced that he had helped Drew get rid of Stacy's body. Oh God. See, Thomas told the police that on the night Stacy went missing, Drew had called him and asked for help moving a big, blue oil barrel into his car. Thomas didn't know what was inside, but he remembered that it was warm to the touch. Some neighbors also came forward, saying they'd seen Drew dragging a large barrel out of his house and into his car around 10 p.m. after Stacy had disappeared, and all of it was caught on CCTV. So while Drew Peterson was out there quitting his job, doing interviews with television, radio, and news stations, investigators were quietly building their case against him. As it turned out, Drew Peterson, the ex-cop who thought he was untouchable, he was on the police's radar the whole time. And after they went through all the witness statements, the new autopsy reports, and Drew's long, shady history of controlling and manipulating women, the detectives finally had enough to arrest him. And that's exactly what they did. On May 7th, 2009, Drew Peterson was finally arrested for Kathleen's murder, 5 years after she had died. But there was a huge problem. Neither Stacy nor Kathleen could testify against Drew. Stacy was missing and Kathleen was dead. So pretty much everything the state had against him, it was just hearsay. And this led to Illinois passing a new law, which became known as Drew's Law. This law basically said that hearsay statements, things that witnesses were told by someone who is now unavailable to testify, could be used in court against a defendant, if it was believed the defendant had murdered that witness to keep them from testifying. The only catch was that the statements had to be deemed reliable, and using them had to be in the best interest of justice. So, you couldn't just have people spreading rumors to try and swing a jury. So, with that new law in place, the trial for Kathleen's murder began in 2012, 3 years after he was arrested. And that was the prosecution's whole game plan, led by the state's attorney, James Glasgow. The prosecution had no idea if this law was actually going to hold up in court, but that wasn't going to stop them from trying. They brought in a bunch of witnesses, and they even talked about Stacy's disappearance. The defense, meanwhile, was just hammering home the idea that Drew had nothing to do with any of his wife's deaths or disappearances. They argued there was no DNA, no physical evidence, nothing to prove Drew was involved in Kathleen's death. Now, everyone was waiting on pins and needles for the verdict. It felt like everyone in the community believed Drew had something to do with it, but he'd been walking around a free man for years. And now they were terrified that he was just going to get away with it again. After the trial was over, the jury went to deliberate, and then the verdict came back. On September 6, 2012, Drew Peterson was found guilty of murdering Kathleen. He was sentenced to 38 years in prison. He was first incarcerated at Menard Correctional Center, and then later at a federal correctional institution. While he was there, he was actually attacked by another inmate. The guy apparently had a plan to rob him and sell his stuff online. I guess you could call it a dose of instant karma. Either way, it definitely knocked Drew down a few pegs. Drew appealed his conviction over and over again, but the Supreme Court upheld it every single time. You'd think that would be the end of the story, but Drew being Drew, he couldn't keep his anger under control, even in prison. 3 years into his sentence, another inmate snitched on Drew. He said Drew had approached him with an offer. What was the offer? Drew wanted James Glasgow, the prosecutor, from his murder trial dead. And if that doesn't basically scream guilt, I don't know what does. I mean, seriously, this guy. Well, the inmate went straight to the prosecutors and told them everything. He even agreed to wear a wire and ended up recording Drew confessing to the whole plan. So Drew was charged with solicitation of murder and solicitation of murder for hire. He was found guilty in May of 2016, and another 40 years were tacked onto his sentence. Currently, he's incarcerated at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City, Indiana. He's known as inmate number 279193. To this day, Drew still maintains his innocence. He's even done several prison interviews, but we don't need to get into all of that. But what is important is that when Drew retired as a sergeant back in 2007, he was given an annual pension. Fortunately, he lost that pension after he was convicted on the murder for hire charges in 2016, so at least he won't be living off a state salary behind bars. So, Kathleen finally got justice. But we have to remember, Drew was only convicted for her murder, not Stacy's. And that's what's so heartbreaking about this whole thing. To this day, no one knows where Stacy is, what really happened to her, or where that blue barrel ended up. Drew's former lawyer, Joel Brodsky, who acted more like Drew's publicist than his attorney, back when Stacy disappeared, he appeared on 48 Hours and vaguely hinted that the truth about what happened to Stacy would come out after Drew dies. He didn't explain what he meant, but it left a really bad taste in everyone's mouth. Then in May of 2022, Joel came forward again, saying he needed to expose information he had about Drew that was protected by attorney-client privilege. You can imagine that Stacy's sister, Cassandra, had a weird mix of emotions about this, but regardless, she believes that whatever this information is, it could be the key to cracking Stacy's cold case. The problem is, Joel is under a gag order and isn't allowed to reveal any confidential information related to Drew. And it's also led some people to question if Joel even has any information at all, or if he's just saying this for attention, But Cassandra, she's still hopeful that the information could help solve her sister's case, and maybe even help find her body so she can finally have a peaceful goodbye. And speaking of finding Stacy, her sister Cassandra has been trying relentlessly to find her ever since she went missing. She's really the only person who's been actively searching for Stacy since 2007, and she's used every resource she can to try and find her and bring her home. She started a Facebook page dedicated to the search, and she also set up a GoFundMe to help pay for the recovery of Stacy's remains, if they're ever found. And very recently, in April of 2024, Cassandra announced that she believes she may have finally found Stacy's remains in a canal in Illinois. Her team used sonar technology to locate something in a canal in an area they'd narrowed down after talking to different eyewitnesses. And Cassandra has apparently been keeping tabs on this specific location since 2009. Recently, a video was shared on the Justice for Stacy Facebook page that shows an underwater drone recovering images of what appear to be remains on the riverbed. After the images were modified and cleared up, you could identify a skull, a rib cage, and lower leg bones. Cassandra told law enforcement about this discovery all the way back in 2008, but the investigators, they basically ignored her. They made no attempt to go get the remains. This left Cassandra with no other choice but to keep trying on her own to find better ways to get those remains out of the water. She rented high-tech equipment from all the way in Alaska and went back to the investigators. And this time, the police did check the area, but they came back saying they only found a rock and that the rest of the area was clear. And this was enough to convince Cassandra that the investigators weren't going to do anything about what she'd found. Likely, she thought, because they were all friends with Drew. And that's why she ended up starting a GoFundMe page to raise money, to get better, higher quality equipment and to hire divers to go into that canal and bring up whatever it was that the drone had found. It's now been 17 years since Stacy went missing. And Drew, even though he's already in prison for Kathleen's murder, he still needs to be held accountable if he's the one who harmed Stacy and caused her death. But since there's no body and no rock-solid evidence, Drew can't be tried for whatever he might have done to Stacy. And that fact, it just weighs heavily on everyone's mind, especially Stacy's sister, Cassandra. Cassandra is still looking for the right people to help her find and recover what she believes are her sister's remains. Her only goal is to get those remains out of the water and have them tested. Because if it is her sister, she doesn't want Stacy to be left in a place like that. She wants to be able to lay her sister to rest properly, to have a place where she can go to talk to her and remember her. If those remains are ever recovered, they can be tested, but until then, no one knows whose body is lying at the bottom of that water. This case, it's a lot to take in. To think that a police sergeant could go to such lengths and abuse the authority and power that his badge gave him. You can only hope that Cassandra is finally successful in her search for Stacy, because she deserves closure. It's 17 years overdue, and her suffering needs to end.